Welcome everyone. Just checking people can see the slides on the screen. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Karen. Welcome to our event today, which is Speaking Up. I'm chairing as well as participating in our panel session today, and we'll wait for a few more to join. We're expecting quite a few today, which is great. Before we get started, I'll do a quick intro to WARAN. So people who've been to an event with us before will have heard my intro before, but no harm in repeating it, and give you an insight into the upcoming events before talking in detail about the running order for today's session and a little bit of background about the speakers before I invite them to introduce themselves. As you can see on the slide currently, you can introduce yourself in the chat if you like. And as this is a speaking up session, there'll be plenty of opportunities for QA and opportunities for you to come in with your own reflections. We're also doing breakout rooms halfway through the session. So lots of opportunities to speak today. So if you had come thinking that you just want to listen, that's fine, but we're going to try and encourage you to speak too. Okay, I'll just give it a couple more seconds because the numbers are still going up. And Rachel has to leave early. That's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. We are going to record this session and put it on our WARAN YouTube channel. And as a reminder, you can get access to past events, including our recent presentations, the LAN lecture. So yeah, lots of opportunity to catch up on stuff if you are new to WARAN.
Waiting room's empty, Catherine.
Okie dokie, I'll make a start then. So welcome again for those who only just joined. This is the Speaking Up session, also billed as the Speak Up and When It's Best to Stay Quiet. But as you'll see as we develop, there's different elements that we're taking forward with this sort of Speaking Up session today. But first, before we get into those details, we'll go through some bits about WARAN. So I hope the slides have just moved on, have they? Fantastic. So this is the Women in OR and Analytics Network, part of the OR Society, and we get together monthly for events, and we have a great deal of sponsors there, and it's all about sort of a safe space for promoting and supporting women. But of course, we're open to men as well. All our events tend to be online. We've experimented with face-to-face as well, and we do see each other at the conferences where we can as well. But the events are online, and as I've already mentioned, usually recorded and available on our YouTube channel. And they take the form of panel discussions similar to what we're doing today, specific talks, or social events and other types of things such as book discussions. So coming up, just dates for your diary. We're usually the third Thursday. This one was the fourth Thursday because I wasn't available last week. So, but in general, the next one coming up is a caring responsibilities conversation. And then we've got mentoring the following month. Panel discussion in April about things we wish we'd known earlier. And a really interesting OR discussion in May.
Your slides haven't moved forward, Catherine, so still on welcome. There you go. That's it.
Oh, thank you. Cheers.
Fine. But I think you read out anyway, so.
Thank you. That's great. Have they moved on now?
Yes. Yeah.
Great. So the outline for today, you can see that now, can you, Ruth? Great. So on to today's session. There's three of us that will be taking you through three different topics related to speaking up. So I'll be covering getting the message across, and Shamim will be covering confidence to speak up, and Robin will be looking at handling sensitive issues and conversations. So it'll be a bit sort of informal. We're talking a bit about our backgrounds usually, so sort of some anecdotes, some storytelling, opportunities for Q&A. And as I mentioned, after Shamim's session, we're going to try a breakout room as well for people to discuss what they've heard and introduce themselves to each other to get a bit of networking. We'll end with top tips and key takeaways from the session. And we'll have an evaluation form as well, which would be grateful for you to feed back on. Thank you. So I'll talk through the speakers we have today. You've probably seen this in the material you were sent in advance. And then I'll pass over to each of us to do a bit more of an introduction as to why we're here. So to start with, Robin Brace has been in Gauze for over a decade. She's said here that she's been speaking up feminist for slightly less time, but I think she's more than made up for it. She's been in various government departments and is now at the Department for Transport. And I'm Catherine Kent. I've already introduced myself as chair at Waran, but I'm also part of Gauze, working for the Office for National Statistics. I'm an extrovert, so I often speak, but sometimes I've been told to tone it down a bit and think before I speak. So I'll be covering that part as well in my session. And then finally, Shamim Rahman, she's an operational researcher and deputy director at the Department for Health and Social Care, with a varied career, and in her role and previous roles speaks to a lot of people in power, whether that be ministers, third sector CEOs, and people within the NHS. She's a natural introvert, but she has learned a lot on how to make an impact whilst maintaining her authentic self. And I should also point out that she's often the only woman of colour in the room, and touch on that as well in her part. So I'm going to stop sharing the slides so we can see each other. Hopefully they've gone. And I'll invite Robin to give us a bit more of an introduction.
Hi everyone. Yes, I entered the civil service with the opinion that everyone should be treated equally and it didn't matter what gender you were. And unfortunately, when joining the civil service, it became quite clear to me quite quickly that not everyone felt the same. So actually, action was needed. One of the reasons why I am here, slightly unbeknownst to her, was Catherine emailed around asking if anyone would be interested in taking part. And the day before, I had spent an hour and a half walking around St. James Park with a former colleague, a young female economist who was completely lost and very sad because she didn't feel like anyone was listening to her in her work. She didn't feel like she was valued. And that really had an impact on me. And as someone who has made a bit of a habit of speaking up, but is still terrified every single time, I have to keep in mind the impact it has. I have to keep in mind how many people there are who still need to be helped and championed. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here. Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll go next. So why am I here? So, well, I think it's good to talk. And I've seen through being chair of Waran and attending the events that Ruth puts on, that we have really good engagement through Waran, lots of attendees, but in some settings, we have a small proportion of men attending, but a lot of the contributions and questions come from men. So that isn't necessarily a bad thing, and I'm not here to sort of silence the men in the audience, but I'm really interested to explore those barriers to participation in group discussion. Also, our events are online, and we like to use breakout rooms to try and replicate that more informal chat networking element. But again, they've had limited success. So we thought, right, well, let's put on a session and see where we go from there. A little bit more about me. So by nature, I'm risk-taking and resilient. Therefore, I don't mind speaking my mind. I don't like letting people down though. So sometimes I feel bad if I don't contribute, because I feel like I might be letting the presenter down or not championing people in the room as much as I should. I also still get imposter syndrome, particularly in technical discussions. I'm a competent OR analyst, but as we know, OR is very broad, and therefore you can't be the expert in everything. So sometimes I feel a bit out of my comfort zone. I don't mind asking stupid questions though, and it's you hear this a lot, but if you don't understand, then there's someone else in the room that hasn't understood. So sometimes it's good to ask those questions and to broaden that understanding. Another thing about me is that I'm very prepared and capable of making decisions quickly, and that comes out in my speaking up part, which I'll go into. I'll add that I've had feedback that I should intervene less. That could be for a number of reasons, potentially not to crowd out others, and to make what I'm saying more impactful. But I'm going to come back to that in my part of the session. So I'll hand over to Shameen.
Thanks, Catherine. So I have had quite a long career in OR. I first came across OR when I was doing my undergraduate at UCL, and there were some courses there on OR, and that was sort of my first exposure to a thing that was called OR. And at the time, I didn't understand it very much. And I went off and did something else after university, did a couple of years in a different career, and then kind of came back to it, thinking what else I might want to do, because I wasn't enjoying my career at the time, and went and did a master's in OR at Southampton, and then started my career across sort of in the private sector and a couple of different organizations and consultancy and at British Airways as well, and then also had several different jobs in different government departments. I wanted to take part in this when Catherine emailed around, because I feel like there's been a real change in the confidence I feel to speak up. I never thought my job would be influencing some of the most senior people in government, who can be very clever people, who can also have very strong views themselves, and that would be my job. And not only would it be my job, but that I'd actually really enjoy that job, and specifically those aspects of that. So I think off sort of as a new graduate and over the years, having that confidence to maybe look different to other people in the room, have different views, have a personality that is naturally introverted, which I don't think means that you don't speak, because introversion has many different aspects to it, and part of it is just about the way I like to reflect about things and take time out. But just that change is something I thought would be nice to talk about with all of you, for people who might also have found themselves changing as their career goes on.
Thank you very much, Shameen. Right, that takes us on to the first part, which I'm leading. And like I said, the sort of format is going to be, I'll speak for a couple of minutes, give you a couple of stories, invite Robin and then Shameen to come in with any reflections, and then we'll open it up for a short Q&A, either on things that you've heard or stories that you want to share. This section is called Getting the Message Across. So this is about sort of like when you're speaking up, how do you get heard, really? And I've got two very different scenarios, I think, to sort of talk you through. And I'm not shy about speaking up, but there's something about making that an impactful message. So the first is about selling yourself. So this could be related to an interview situation, communicating with your boss if you've got a sort of sense of skill sets. It might have been relevant to Robin's colleague that she mentioned that she went for a walk in the park with. And then the second is about making a great contribution in a meeting, and you know, when you're sort of potentially brainstorming ideas and making sure that you get heard in those situations. So over the years, I've learned that a little preparation can go a long way. I do have a tendency potentially to think before I speak, and that will come back as well a couple of times here as well. But around 8 years ago, I was in a bit of a career funk, and I had a new boss at the time, and I couldn't seem to get across my strengths in the role, and he wasn't working out what effectively was me, the essence of me. And I went on a Women in Leadership program at the time, the Crossing Thresholds Women in Leadership program, which some of you may be familiar with if you've worked in government, which was really good and really insightful. And one of the things I took away from there was the concept of an elevator pitch, where you effectively have a really short, sharp statement. So it's a headline, a strap line, 3 key points, and a call to action. And it can be applied in many situations. So it could be like selling a product. That's the whole point. You know, you're a tech company, you've got a new idea, you're selling it. That's the whole concept. But you can apply it in different situations. So I applied it to me and being able to sell myself effectively. So I revisited this, and I hope you don't mind me sharing it with you now. So my elevator pitch was my unique mix of skills facilitates change for the better. I'm an enthusiastic problem solver with a strong analytical background and succeed in bringing teams together to transform and improve. I embrace change, seeking out opportunities to make things better. I'm a risk taker by nature, leading to innovation, but I'm also equally resilient when I hit unforeseen setbacks. I have a series of successful projects which I'm passionate about and happy to share this experience with others. So come and talk to me when you have an unsolved problem or want advice on a critical decision. So that's my elevator pitch, and I'm not claiming that I use it verbatim in every time, but there's certain elements that I can pull out, particularly in interviews. And in terms of that conversation with my boss, I was able to pick out key elements to really make him understand my strengths. So that's the first situation. The second is more like that brainstorming in a meeting type approach. So as a government operational researcher, it's really important that we are able to demonstrate delivering analysis with impact. So a lot of those skills relate to presenting. This is slightly different because it's not presenting to an audience and how you do that, but it's sort of more smaller scale, just discussing your ideas and getting your ideas across. So I was reflecting that I'm often quick to jump in with, I know how to solve this, we can do this, we can do that, then we'll do that, and the result will be this. And as a logical OR person, I get frustrated when people overlook it. So it's like, yeah, thanks for that, and then they move on to someone else. And I mentioned earlier that I had the feedback, which was unhelpful at the time, that I should think before I speak, but I think it was relevant to this point. I later was able to unpack that with a coach, and we explored 2 aspects. So firstly, I work on extremely complex issues, therefore my style of sort of, we can do this, we can do that, it's sort of apparently breezy in nature and potentially overlooks the complexity, and they think that I don't necessarily understand that complexity, or it simply won't work. So to overcome that, I put my OR hat on and go back to the problem structuring. So making sure I've got buy-in for the problem statement, what we're trying to achieve, and get buy-in at that stage. get consensus there. So you can ask open questions. So does anyone have an alternative view? How would you develop this idea further? What information would you have? The other side to that is preparation. So I already mentioned that you should do some preparation, but that goes around the relationships that you build in advance. So who's going to be in the room? Who can you warm up in advance? Who has the power? That can all help. So a great example I had of this, which was done well, was when I was in a discussion which was hugely academic, and the most senior and respected person in the room was a superb female economist, and she was able to consciously bring me and others into the discussion, reiterate our points, and actively agreed with them to get buy-in. And when I've seen that working, now I try and, as I gain more seniority and more power myself, to be able to try and replicate that. Just to finish, to say that sometimes now we're all working online, some of this sort of stuff is harder. It's harder to read the room. But you can use features such as hands, chat to try and get your point across. Don't overuse them. And remember, the most important thing is listening. So I feel like if you can listen to someone else's point and build on it and feedback other people's comments, that gains that trust, rapport, and buy-in to get your message across. So I'll invite Robin, Shamim for any immediate reflections they have on this.
Thanks, Catherine. I really liked your elevator pitch. And I wanted to highlight that if you feel like your elevator pitch is different to the people around you, that's actually a strength. I work in a very highly technical team and I'm not technical, but that actually means that my skills complement theirs really well. And I've just been pulled onto a project for precisely that reason. So that's great. I also sometimes fall into the trap of selling myself short so as to not seem threatening to the people in the grades below me who feel they shouldn't be in the grades below me. And that's a bad trap to fall in, because sometimes people might start believing you if you keep selling yourself short. But I really liked your elevator pitch, Catherine.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add a bit about something that struck me when you were talking about sort of feedback. And I think this is something as I've become more experienced both in the workplace, but also actually in my personal life as well, about like feedback is excellent. And in the civil service, we're really encouraged to get feedback, and particularly when you're a senior civil servant, you do this thing called 360 feedback, which is anonymized feedback, which I really value because it gives people a chance that might not be might not feel confident to come directly to me and say what they want is another way of getting it. But I think one of the things, and maybe this is a gendered thing, because just from what I've observed, I think sometimes we can take all the feedback and feel like we need to just change completely based on what other people are telling me. And I think there's something around what parts of feedback do you want to take on, and it's okay to challenge feedback and think, do I, this is great, this reflects what I think, or maybe I want to think about, I haven't thought about it in this way, and maybe it's true if people are saying it. But there's also the other aspect, which is actually maybe they're misunderstanding something, and their strength in the way I do it. So not necessarily thinking you have to take on every piece of feedback and change, but being quite in the way that we challenge work and not accept everything as a truth. I think doing that with feedback as well can be really helpful.
Amazing. No, that's really helpful. And thank you for the love, you two. Like, you're both like, oh, that was really nice to hear. But also, yeah, your reflections is really strong. Thank you. So before we move on, we've still got a couple of minutes. So was there any questions, as I said, in a safe space, or any stories or anything that anyone wanted to share related to getting their message across, perhaps when it's gone well, or perhaps when it hasn't gone so well, or if they wanted any tips? We're not experts, but we can certainly offer some advice. I have 2 hands up. I'm going to go to Rosemary first, if that's okay, Ruth. Rosemary, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Because I'm on the browser rather than the app.
Yeah, you're fine.
Cool. I was just reflecting on your elevator pitch, and I've been on some similar sort of training, and we've talked about there. It had a slightly different slant to yours, and I used it in those introductions. You know, when you're meeting someone new. Okay, hi, I'm Rosemary, and it's easy to go. Oh, I'm the head of colleague data and analytics, and like it's quite dry, but it's what everybody does, so it feels easy to do it. And I tried a few times kind of using my elevator pitch introduction that was more like, I'm here to help you make better decisions by solving your difficult analytical problems. And it felt so awkward because it's not normal or not culturally normal. But I think it had more impact. And so that in terms of like selling yourself and having that impact, I think it's good. It's a good thing to do and to try it even when it feels uncomfortable. And I also liked what was said about, what makes you unique. I think one of the other panelists there was saying, I'm not so technical in a very technical world, but when I read mine, it might look very similar to a lot of other technical people, but amongst the people I work with, it's different to what they do. So what stands out in different scenarios can be different. What you might uniquely bring can be different.
Great. Thanks, Rosemary. We've got lots of nods as well. I've seen lots of nods, which is fantastic. Ruth, did you have a question or a comment?
I was only going to say, also on the elevator pitch, I think it's harder than it sounds to do a good elevator pitch. I remember I was getting some coaching once, and I was going for a job in a different area, and the coach said to me, just imagine we're in the interview, what do you bring to this job? And I froze. And I discovered then that what I'd had ready as my elevator pitch was just completely inauthentic. I had to go right back to the beginning and work out really what it was. And then I think if you can bounce it off somebody else, and if you're thinking of doing this, you can pick anybody in this room and just bounce it off them about, are you too inward looking on it? Are you worrying too much about what the other person might be thinking when you do it? So it's getting that right balance between this is what I really bring, but actually being able to bounce it off the outside world, so check the outside world is interested. But I think it's
Great
example.
Thank you, Ruth. Thanks, Ruth. That's great. Thanks for sharing. We had a quick question in the chat from Zoe for Robin to say, how do you stop selling yourself short? Is it just practice?
I think it's slightly practice and slightly figuring out in advance alternative ways to say things. How many of us have said, this might be a stupid question, but... So instead, you can practice by saying things like, apologies if you think I already know this, can you clarify? Or things like that are, just slightly different. I'm aware that what I've just said, some people might think is still selling yourself short, but just practicing and trying to come up with alternative ways of, for me, trying to sound non-threatening or trying to navigate what can be quite a complex social situation, while not making it harder for myself in the future.
I also got picked up on, I was giving a presentation about my career, and I said I was lucky to get promoted into that role, and someone picked me up on it and said it wasn't luck. Why are you saying it was lucky that you did that? So I was like, oh yeah, I've not thought of that before. So really interesting. Thank you. Great. I think we'll move on there in the interest of time. And Shamim, you're taking the second section.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So yes, I mentioned at the beginning in my introduction a bit about sort of the change I felt and the way I approach speaking up throughout my career and the way that's changed. And I think sometimes we think things just happen, but I feel like that. So I was speaking to somebody in my team who does struggle to speak up in meetings, and I talked about the change that I'd felt throughout my career, and she said, "Well, how did it happen? Like, what can I do?" And I was like, "I don't actually remember." And then it made me really reflect on like, what is it that I actually did? And there are very deliberate things that we can do to change the way we feel about ourselves and the way we feel about speaking up, and it's not just a coincidence. And as Catherine said, it's not chance and luck. There, you have an influence in the way that you are. You can't influence everybody else, but you can kind of influence how you are and how you react to what other people are doing and saying. So just one example has happened a few years ago. So I currently work at the Department of Health and Social Care, and I went and did a secondment at what was at the time the Department for International Development, which is now merged with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And I was really excited about working in an international field. I hadn't done that before. Most of my career has been on national issues. And I went there, and I knew it was quite a different government department. People there tend to think of themselves as development specialists rather than, rather than civil servants. So it was quite a different culture and atmosphere. And I really felt like a fish out of water. There were some people that they'd worked abroad, that worked in, conflict zones. They were doctors, because I worked at a health team. Some of them were public health doctors. And I was just really daunted by all the expertise in the room that I didn't have. And I just went really quiet and felt it really difficult to say anything in meetings, because all I could think about was just how clever and accomplished and experienced all these people were, and how they had this different set of experience that I didn't have. And at the time, I was on something called the Future Leaders Scheme, which is a kind of a cross-government leadership program that helps people sort of at mid-management level to progress to the senior civil service. And as part of that, we were offered coaching. So I had a coach, which was really helpful, and I would recommend to anyone who hasn't tried coaching to try it. And we kind of talked through this scenario of why was I just silent in these meetings, and I'd kind of got into a situation where all I could think about in the meeting was that I was silent, and it was just this self-fulfilling prophecy. And we talked about that. And I think what I learned from that is that sometimes we can start thinking about it so much that we're not actually living in the moment. We're not, because part of communication and speaking up is actually looking at what's going on in the room. Part of it's about listening. Part of it's where is the conversation going? And as part of my job now, I have to think a lot about what are the things that are being unsaid. So people are speaking, but there's different motivations. People have different roles in meetings. What are the messages that people aren't actually saying, and what is influencing the meeting? And I can do that now, but part of that skill is just letting go of the need to feel like you need to say something, because otherwise you can't be in the room to think about those other things that are so important when you're influencing people. And if that is your job at any point in time, that becomes so important, because the way you have impact is by understanding people's motivations and behaviors. And I think there's something as simple as people just really aren't thinking about you as much as they're thinking about themselves. So I was thinking about the fact that I was being silent, but nobody else in the room was really thinking about that. They were just thinking about the next thing they were going to say or the contribution they were going to make. And we talked through this with my coach, and we talked through some particular techniques. And I think this is where, you can take small actions to change things. So we talked about what was my role, and what was what was the role that I had in that meeting. So I was the analyst in that room, and nobody else had that skill. So somebody maybe a really experienced public health doctor who's worked in the most exotic places in the world, but they're not an analyst. They don't know about OR. They don't, they might. Doctors are very clever. They do sometimes know a lot about analysis, but that's not what they're trained in. So they might understand statistics or mathematical methods, but they don't know it to that depth. So my role wasn't just necessarily knowing about international development. It was about applying OR problems to world issues, which I'm hugely experienced at. And once I realized that I had a particular role, and it may not be that role, it may be some other role. You may be the person with an expertise in a particular topic. Like now I go to meetings because I lead on mental health and women's health and neurodiversity. Those are kind of my topics of expertise now. So how do you leverage that and speak up and think about your particular contribution and specialism to give you the technique we talked about? Was, do I need to be the person that comes up with the novel idea? Do I need to say something that no one else has said? Or can my contribution be building on someone else's idea? So somebody says something and I think that's a great idea, genuinely, not because I'm just trying to think of something to say. And then I add to that and isn't that a contribution as well? And once you watch people in meetings, you'll see that happens quite a lot. So you don't have to be the creative person in any kind of workplace. Different people have different roles. Some people are great at delivery. Some people are that creative person. Some people are strategic. Some people really understand the operational side of it. We all have our expertise, and it all fits all really well together. So you don't have to be the first person with the novel idea. So that was really important. And once I realized that, and actually it builds credibility, because everybody loves their ideas to be supported. So when you say something supportive to somebody else's idea, you're already building a rapport and credibility in the room naturally by doing that. So that was the other thing. The other thing I think I realized was, do I need to speak? And this is so because I was not in this situation, but in other situations where I've been with really senior people during the pandemic, when I worked on some obviously really things that were impacting people's lives and deaths. I had a meeting with someone who again was a public health doctor, very senior. And I was so keen. This person was like in the press as well, in the news. Everybody knew them. They were a public figure. I really wanted to make an impression, and I just kind of said something. And then he kind of made a face, and he was like, "What do you mean?" Like, and he was quite kind of didn't get what I was trying to say. And I was like, and then I could see other people in the room were like trying not to laugh, which made me feel awful at the time. But what I reflected on afterwards, and this is just about like sometimes bad things happen, but you have to kind of think about, well, what did I actually get out of that experience? And that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was just in the moment, it made me feel bad. But what I thought about then was like, did I actually need to speak? Like I said something and it was just like this random thing. And it was almost because I just wanted to say something, but would it have been better not to speak in that moment? And what was I actually trying to achieve? Because it wasn't like I had a really great point that I felt was a really great point. I was almost speaking for the sake of speaking. And since then, I've actually resisted doing that. Like not just speaking because I want to make an impression on someone, because that has the potential to go wrong, but speaking because I feel like I have a contribution to make. So that was another kind of interesting experience that I learned from. And then finally, I think there's something around allyship that Catherine touched on, and the way I've been moved by allyship. So quite recently, a couple of months ago, we've also had a new government. I was in one of the first briefings with the Secretary of State on mental health. And there was a lot of people, everybody wants to be in those initial meetings where you are meeting a new Secretary of State. He's got lots of power. People have ideas, it was all the way from, I think, the permanent secretary down. There were a lot of very confident, experienced people in the room, and everybody was wanting to say something to make that first impact on the Secretary of State. And I was really struggling to come in. And I had something I wanted to say, again, relying on my expertise. It was an analytical point that I really felt would kind of influence what he was asking for. And I was struggling, and one of my colleagues, who's another deputy director, she almost stopped the entire room. She was like, she kind of made this gesture, and I think said something at the time, and said, kind of pointed to me and said, Shimeen wants to say something. And I didn't forget that, because that kind of allyship in the room where somebody else like takes a risk, and it was a risk for her to do that as well. She's also somebody at the same level as me, there's other powerful voices in the room, but she made that choice in the moment to let me speak. And I was actually the only person of color in the room at the time. I don't think that makes necessarily a difference in that situation, but I do sometimes feel different because nobody else looks like me. And whether that's not something I consciously think about, but on a subconscious level, however you are different, whether you're the only woman in the room, whether you look different, whether you come from a different class background, that does play on our subconscious. And it might actually play on other people's consciousnesses as well. So I think where you are, where you can be an ally, and I really want to pay that forward, and I try to do that as well with other people. Do think about looking around the room and who else might be like trying to speak, and how do you bring that person in and give them that platform, because that's how we all support each other. Thanks.
Amazing, thank you, Shimeen. I was just your point around overthinking the fact that you haven't spoken. I mean, there's a way you can do that. So if you in an online meeting like this, if it's been recorded, if you can bear to watch it back, you can see that play out in real time, and you go, actually, I did speak. You kind of just forget what contribution you made, and you can sort of go, oh, actually, I could have made a better intervention there. And you do see that in people's faces as well, that they're sort of like, they're not listening because they're just they're just jumping, waiting to jump in. They're looking for that gap to get in. And I remember doing things around body language, where you can sort of, put yourself forward on a chair, put your arms on the table to sort of make a point of I'm coming in next kind of thing. These sorts of things, which is quite interesting.
And actually, if I can come back in, because I remembered a story somebody told me, just based on what you've told me, somebody quite who was at the time a director, and I was much more junior in government, and she was talking about her journey and how she'd spoken to her mentor, and she was in lots of Secretary of State meetings. And her mentor said to her, where are you sitting in the room? And she said, oh, I'm at the sofa on the side. And she said, and then the mentor, she was telling the story, she said, my mentor said, the first thing you need to do is sit at the table and don't do anything else, get a seat at the table. So that's what she did. So the next time she walked into the room, she just sat at the table. She didn't sit on the side sofa. Like, if you're in a meeting, you deserve a place on the table. So that's something I've learned from her, and I always do that. So when I walk into a ministerial room and there's lots of people, I just go and sit at the table. And if I see other women making their way to the side sofa, I say, sit at the table. Because nobody else in the room, if you're in the meeting, you deserve to be in that meeting. So no one else deserves that place at the table more than you. And they'll just bring in more chairs and it'll be fine and everybody will have a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm. Robin, did you have anything on this one?
I'll do it very quickly because I know I want to make space for breakout rooms. Don't beat yourself up if you make a mistake, if you don't talk. I didn't correct a DD who took my thoughts and disagreed with it and agreed with it when the male said it. And I now use it as a comedic story. Don't beat yourself up. And the second one was, I love in my new position being able to be an ally. I love being able to bring people in at the end and say, oh, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. We haven't actually heard from you. Is there anything you feel you would like to add at the end of every meeting? Or literally, we had a team meeting and the junior female member of staff who had organised it was sitting at the side. And I sent her a message going, you're going to swap places with me. You are going to sit at the table. I will sit at the side, because she was the one who'd organised it. She was several grades below me. If there was anyone who was going to sit at a table, it will have been her. And I was able to do that. And I love being able to do that for people. So yes, I recommend keeping an eye out for when you can.
Great, thanks, Robin. So I've made the executive decision to not do the breakout rooms because I don't think we've got the time to go away and come back. But some people may be disappointed, and that was an element that I wanted to explore today. But I think it would be better to put questions directly to Shamim. Particularly, there may be people who've got questions about the fact that you're from an ethnic minority background and whether that's impacted on you, the way you speak or anything like that, or the fact that you have that exposure to ministers, which some people may be aspiring to do in their careers and stuff like that. So we've got a couple of minutes for any questions for Shamim before Robin takes us through the last part. Or any other reflections. If I went too narrow there, like anything else. We had some nice comments in the chat though. That's good. From Kelda, love the phrase "sit at the table."
That's when I put my hand up a bit slow. But I guess I would just like echo what Shamim was saying as well about not being afraid when you made a mistake. Like I remember a call like just a month or two ago where it was a very senior group of people there. I was almost like, oh my gosh, why am I even in this call? And I was trying to be confident and say, no, I deserve to be here. I've been asked for a reason. I've got a seat at the table. And I kind of got asked a question about something. It wasn't the bit I felt was strongly about, but I felt I needed to give an answer. And I gave an answer, and I could tell it was like that tumbleweed moment that you kind of described as like, but then I try not to let that put me off. And so like when something else came up next, then I was like, no, I really do have an opinion on this one, and it's something that I still want to make the point about. I kind of consciously told myself just kind of put that out there because it won't go as bad as that previous one. And these things happen, and people are probably forgotten much quicker than I will have forgotten it. So it's just kind of in support of that yes, sometimes you want to contribute and it's right to contribute, and sometimes your contribution falls flat for whatever reason. It doesn't quite hit the right note, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't try again.
Okay, in that case, I'll hand over to Robin. It's got some really interesting stories on more sensitive or more like empowering topics.
Yes, I am going to try and be very careful. So apology if it sounds like I'm being a bit cagey. For me, one of the key stories, one of the things I am most proud of in my career is that I was in a team in unnamed department. I was at a level which was not a management level. The management in the team that we were in, the management level above was predominantly male, not complete, but predominantly male. And I observed over several months, half a year, that actually the culture in the team was sexist. And I wasn't happy with it. I wasn't happy with how the women in the team were being treated. I was good friends with the woman who was the business support, and the way that she got spoken to, the way that she got treated it was all tiny things, but it was constant. Things like she was expected to remind the managers that they needed to send the team lead an update every week. And one of these managers wheeled over to her and told her, "You haven't sent the reminder email." And then there was another time when me and a co-worker were organising induction activities. And we were trying to do it in lots of different formats to meet the needs of all of these managers. And one of them had told us that he was in a meeting beforehand, so we needed to phone him beforehand to remind him to show up. And I was furious at this. I politely requested that he uses the alarm clock on his phone. And then I was in such a rage, I couldn't do any productive work for the rest of the day. So instead, I made an automated Gantt chart in Excel, which I still use to this day as my rage Gantt chart. So a lot of things were happening and I wasn't happy with it. I was in a very fortunate position, to be totally honest. I was in a very fortunate position where I got on very, very well with the deputy director. I trusted him and I knew that he would listen to me. So I spoke up. I put a meeting in his calendar and we went and had a conversation where I explained to him why I wasn't happy. And going back to what Catherine said, a little bit of preparation really helped me here because I was able to pick out examples, some of which I've mentioned, of things that had happened. Because if you sit down and you say, I think this team might have a bit of a sexist environment without examples, without facts, and then what I found helpful was actually focusing on the impacts of those. I know from many, many interactions, and I'm sure some of you will have this as well, that the defense for this is they didn't intend to. They didn't intend to do these sexist things. They didn't intend to make those women feel that way. So by focusing on the impact that it had, that is irrefutable. That is a case of it doesn't necessarily matter whether or not these people intended to have an impact, they did have an impact. I was not a manager in that team, so I was not involved in the conversations going forward. And I will not pretend that things instantly got better. For quite a while, it felt quite frustrating to me that things didn't instantly get better. I'm quite impatient in that way. But with time and looking back, I have been more and more assured that I did the right thing. While I was still in that team, there were at least 2 instances where women in that team reached out to me and asked for specific help on very sensitive and I was going to say sexist adjacent. I'm going to stick with it. Sexist adjacent problems. And I was able to help them on that, and they knew that I would help. Overall, it felt like the team did get better and more balanced. It did feel like behaviors got challenged, even if it was quietly. And after I'd left, I found that actually there were quite a few instances where junior female members of the teams were being supported in actions in training courses, in equality courses that weren't really being championed in the same way beforehand. So I really appreciated doing that. I was really scared doing it. I am still really scared when I do stuff like that. It doesn't always work. Raising sensitive topics sometimes just doesn't have the right impact, or I am a flawed human being, so I sometimes do it wrong or do it right, but actually there was no way to do it completely right. Yes, so if you're going to speak up about something sensitive, it might be that it's not possible because you're not in as fortunate situation as I was in. But if you are going to have that little bit of thought beforehand, have the facts to hand, have examples to hand, and just be ready to defend from, well, they didn't intend to do that, and have faith that sometimes the benefits will come later. That's me, Catherine.
Great, thank you very much, Robin. I think as well, when we spoke beforehand, before this meeting, you also talked about like that feeling of missing your opportunity to say something. Like you've been in a situation where something like that has happened. So this was a really good example of you proactively seeing an issue and doing something about it. But you've also been in a situation where, you know, you've actually feel like, oh no, I've missed my opportunity to say something. And that happens to me a lot as well. I feel like, and that you can't sort of beat yourself up for those sorts of things. You know, we can't solve every problem, but the more we do it, the more likely it is to, and like you said, using the evidence base, the more likely that other people will learn from that, and those sort of behaviours will be repeated. Thank you for that. Shareen, anything?
Yeah, I think preparation is interesting, and that as a concept, and lots of people use that who, in whatever situation, don't feel as confident. And there's nothing wrong with preparation. That's actually a really good habit. So I think there's something around that. I think there's something around also testing yourself a bit. So I think in my job, where and lots of people will be similar, have a very busy day job, I can't prepare for everything. So I really think about what are the situations where I need to do that preparation that will be most effective and impactful in the way I speak up in those particular situations, whether that's a particularly sensitive issue or whether it's because it's something I don't know much about or whatever the motivation might be. So I think there's something around, if you have limited time, thinking about where you do need to prepare and where you can wing it a bit more or feel more confident because it's maybe a smaller group of people you're quite familiar with. But prep do leave the time to prepare for things. I agree. It's really helpful.
You. So Robin, you had a question in the chat, which I think you answered, but do you mind saying it out loud for everyone? So someone said, how do you deal with rage when something like this happens to you and you're not in a position to change the situation?
Yes, so the advice I typed was with great care, because sometimes it bubbles over and someone asks you if you wouldn't mind passing them the stapler, and you end up shouting at them that you're not their secretary. How dare they back off? And that might not be an appropriate reaction to the situation. There are situations where I think that something is wrong, think that someone is being treated incorrectly, or some people are being treated incorrectly, and I've tried to help and it hasn't worked, or I can't help for various sensitive reasons. There's yes, there are some I'm in at the moment, and they are really, really frustrating. And the things that I do are, I try to raise it to people who could make the difference, and I try to find the balance of not letting it go with becoming too annoying that everyone just gets it, my voice just becomes a monotonous tone in the background that they can drown out. So try to make sure that it still remains, actually, don't forget about this person still needs our help, and we haven't been able to do it yet, so that's really important. I try to directly help if possible. So if I can't change the situation, I can just check in with those people. I can just offer them a walk around the park. I love going for walking meetings around a park. And if it's more about just taking care of myself, leaning on a network, leaning on my friends, leaning on co-workers and people who support me, which I'll say later in my top tips.
Thank you, Robin. Now, I appreciate that obviously what you talked about was sort of sensitive as well, but if anyone did have anything that they wanted to sort of share or some stories, feel free to come in. And also I noticed Ruth put in, oh, Nadia, go on, go in.
Yeah, thank you. Just a great seminar, by the way. Just I want to share a story with you. I remember, early on in my career, I would go to meetings and I would put forward ideas. And I just felt that, I did not have an impact. I would not really have an impact at all. And then 5 minutes later, someone else in the group, most of the time it was a male, just a colleague, they would say a similar thing to me. This is how I was feeling at the time. And then everyone would say, oh, what a smart idea. That was really good. And I have to say, and I hope that this is going to be okay. But I feel that the older I get, the better it is, because I don't really have the same kind of experiences. And I go to meetings, and yesterday I went to a committee meeting. And people at the end came and talked to me and said, oh, we really loved your contributions, please come back again. But now I go to meetings and I can see the same happening to my female colleagues. And I don't know if it is a stereotype, but maybe there is something about this. And but if this happens to you, do you have any tips how you can get out of this? How can you highlight and say and just go back to the group and say, oh, by the way, that was something I raised 5 minutes ago, because it can be very demoralizing.
Yeah, thanks, Nadia. I'll come in first. I thought it was interesting you said that as you've got older, you've recognized it happening to other people. And I think that age or seniority plays is another dimension, isn't it, right? So there may be a sexist bias, but there's also that seniority and particularly where I work in civil service, and I guess it's similar for you in academia, there is a very hierarchical structure. And depending on who's the most senior person in the room, they're the ones that gets listened to. And also their idea, they take credit for the ideas that have come from more junior people. That's something that in academia has happened for decades.
Yeah. That's a good.
So but I think it's like, what can you do to sort of support those more junior women to sort of be like pushing that forward? So yeah, thanks for that. In the interest of time, I think we'll move straight on to the top tips, and maybe we can cover that from Shamima and Robin as well in their summing up. So who wants to go first? Should I go to Shamima first? Top tips, summing up?
Yeah, I don't know if this is a tip. I think there's something around just trying to be your authentic self, and just recognizing kind of what your strengths are, and and just being okay with being yourself, whether that's not speaking much or speaking too much according to some other people, or making mistakes, and trying to just think that, yes, I make mistakes. Every human makes mistakes. It's fine. And I think once you have reached that comfort level, that's when you actually start to speak up more. That's definitely what happened to me when as I mentioned, I think I talked a bit about overthinking and being in your head rather than being in the room. And it's difficult. It doesn't always come, and we all struggle with this, but I think there's something around just embracing whoever you are, whether that's an introvert, an extrovert, someone who does speak up a lot, or doesn't speak up a lot, and whatever you're doing is actually okay. And we all try and improve, but you're also okay right now as you are. And I think once you accept that, you just naturally feel like your ideas are worth sharing.
Yeah.
Go on, Robin. I'll let Robin. Nadia, we're not going to have time to come back to you, unfortunately, but put it in the chat. Robin.
My top tip is have a network for support. And like Ruth said, you've got a network for support, but also there's more people out there. So Kezia is on the call, who got an hour earful from me in the park last Friday, and Fiona is also on the call, who regularly gets random messages from me with requests for help. They can also help you write your elevator pitch, I'm sure, if you are struggling to figure out the very best bits of yourself.
And I'll just finish, so Shami mentioned it earlier already, but the allyship part, you know, recognizing when colleagues need to be brought into conversations, the ones that are perhaps shyer or not giving, you know, talking to them individually to find out, you know, whether there's any barriers there. And yeah, to make, and I feel like, you know, to round it all off, that's one of the objectives of WARAN, to sort of create that safe space. So I hope, like, through attending this session, you know that now there's a lot of familiar faces on the call that you could reach out to if you wanted to talk through any of this stuff with. So yeah, I'll just conclude by thanking my fellow speakers, and thank you for everyone for attending and participating. And we hope to see you at the next event in February on caring responsibilities. Oh, and thanks to our Society and Ruth for sorting out all the tech and everything. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.